It's Essendon versus the Sydney Swans this week at the SCG, Saturday twilight as the season peters out. We're going to go through the match right now in this video.
And they'll fight till the end. Bombers fight for victory. They won't.
You know, I think I got more enjoyment watching the end of the Melbourne-St Kilda game yesterday from Marvel Stadium than anything that Essendon has dished up in the last 5 or 6 weeks. That was just the most amazing thing I've ever seen. The biggest three-quarter time comeback in VFL AFL history, 46 points down. And that would have been, notable enough in itself. But in addition to that, they kicked 2 goals in the last 8 seconds of the match. I mean, you just couldn't make that up, could you? I've just never seen anything like that. You could watch football for 100 years and you'll never see anything like that ever again. It was just remarkable. And it did have some ramifications for the Bombers, with Essendon having Melbourne's first pick in the draft. So St Kilda leapfrog Melbourne. St Kilda will leapfrog us at some point. The Saints play North Melbourne. They play North Melbourne, Richmond, and us in the run home. So they'll leapfrog us anyway. But that was just quite astonishing and probably a bit more interesting than the stuff that the Bombers have dished up. But we are playing the Swans this week. There are 5 games to go, 20 quarters to go, and the only thing we can really get out of this season now is the continued form of some young players. There was some pretty good form in the reserves, and I have a feeling there could be, just reading between the lines, a potential debutant this week. We'll just get to that in a minute. If you like the content I provide, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. About 60% of you watching this are not subscribed. It only takes 1 second to click it, and it doesn't cost any money. So what are you waiting for? I'd really appreciate it if you could do that right now. So Sydney had 2 injuries last week. There'll probably be 2 outs for their team. They had Hamling, who was a hamstring injury, and McLean, who was concussed. So there'll be 2 changes to their side. As for the Bombers, Ridley was injured last week. Just looking at our stocks in the VFL, in terms of key defenders that can come in, I mean, we had 7 listed players in the VFL. There were 2 who didn't play, Hobbs and Archer May. We had the 7 who played in the VFL were Alwyn Davey, Archer Day Wicks, Cale Gerine, Jai Menzie, Jaden Ewan, and Vigo. I don't think Vigo will be playing in the seniors. Alwyn Davey has been playing well in the VFL. I think there's coming towards the end of his career, I don't think he's going to be picked in the senior team. Day Wicks is really struggling. Gerine is really a forward, right? So there's not really room for him in the team. So I was just looking at the team and saying, well, who comes in for Ridley? Well, there's not really an obvious like-for-like replacement in terms of size. I have a feeling we could be seeing Jaden Nguyen in the team, who was our best player of the 7 listed players last week. He's a tough little cookie, and he's been doing some jobs in the VFL in terms of shutting down small opposition forwards. He had 7 intercept marks last week, and he's got a bit of dash, a bit of dare, and he could play in the back line. Obviously, he's not a like-for-like replacement in terms of size, so there need to be a bit of reshuffling. We'd probably have Blackiston and Laverty as the 2 sort of key defenders, the fullback, centre-half back, if you like. So I'll make a little bit of a bold prediction. It might be a bad take and I might get this wrong, but just looking at who can come into the team, I'm not really sure who can come into the team. I mean, Archer May could come back into the team, but he's really a forward. And does he come in for McMahon? Right, McMahon's kicked 2 goals in each of the last 2 games. So, you probably don't want to go with 4 key forwards. So it's a bit of a struggle just looking at sort of who comes in to replace Ridley, given that there isn't an obvious tall defender, if you like, to come into the side. So I'm going to make a bit of a call that Nguyen comes into the team, and we're going to have a little bit of a shuffling, if you like, of the team structure to get him in. I think he could play a pretty good role in the McGrath role, and McGrath could actually move into the midfield a little bit. McGrath actually did play a few games in the did play quite a bit of time in the midfield against the Bulldogs, and he's quite capable of playing there. And why not play him there? McGrath has had some success as a lockdown defender, but he can play in the midfield, and you don't learn unless you try. So I'm going to make a bit of a prediction that Ridley comes out, Nguyen comes in. Depending on Xavier Dersma's status, he would be the obvious wingman to come in for Lawal if Lawal were to get dropped. But I just think that Dersma will probably be out for another week. We'll get the injury report on Tuesday, so we'll see about that. But these injuries for Essendon usually last more than a week, don't they? That's just the way it is. So I'm just making an assumption that Dersma won't come into the side. But if he does come into the side and he is right to go, then I think Lawal will come out. Lawal was, I thought, kind of lucky to retain his spot last week. El Houli was probably going to replace him, but with the out to Dersma, that sort of gave Lawal a reprieve. But I would suggest that Dersma will not be back in the side this week. So the Swans, look, they're better than Essendon in most, as you'd expect. They're a bit of a funny team, the Swans, this year. If you look at the ladder, you've got 9 good teams at the top of the ladder. You've got 8 kind of average teams towards the bottom. And then you've got the Swans in this weird position where they're not quite as good as the top 9 and that they're clearly better than the bottom 8. They're sort of in a category all of their own. They do rely quite heavily on their big 3, Heaney, Warner and Goulden. And Heaney was amazing last week. If you watched his game last week, it was one of the best individual games we've seen from a player this year. You can look at a lot of the key stats there. The Swans shade us on most of the key stats. There's not a whole lot of point going through all this, and we don't really need to go through all the numbers. At the end of the day, Essendon do fall away in most of the key statistical areas. We know that, and the Swans are not really playing like a top 8 team anyway at the moment. They led the GWS Giants last week by about 5 goals and ended up getting overrun and losing the match by 7 goals. So they had an absolute, complete, catastrophic fallout, and it would have been better, I think, watching that game than the Essendon Bulldogs game, which was running concurrently with it. So what can we get out of this game? Well, obviously, like all the other weeks, we just want some improvement from some of the young players. Some of them have been a little bit quiet in recent weeks. We just want to see some continual improvement from players like Angus Clark, Zach Johnson, Lawal, of course, McMahon and others. We want to see Sardel Houli continue to play well. Obviously, his VFL form was really good upon getting back into the side last week. But we're really going to have a look at a lot of players whose positions on the team and on the list are kind of questionable, tradable or delistable, more so tradable. Players like Gresham, Perkins. We're going to be watching these players really, really closely. Guelphy even. It's going to be a fascinating off-season to see what happens. Are there going to be players that request trades? Are we going to put players up for trades? It's just going to be fascinating to see what happens given the makeup of our team. I think no one knows exactly how it's going to happen and exactly who we're going to select in the draft, exactly what type of players we need, midfielders and all that sort of stuff. It's really going to be an incredibly eventful off-season. Do I envisage a better performance this week than against the Bulldogs? I do. If you look at a lot of the Swans' key metrics, they're not actually that good. We're sort of falling into the trap of thinking that they're a bit like the Swans of the early part of last year. They're not. They're not like that at all. And their form last week in the second half was pathetic. It was just as bad as us. I mean, they got outscored by 70 points or even more than that in just over a half of football. They're really not playing well. And if you can shut down their key players, their best players, Heaney, Warner, Goulden, you're actually a bit of a chance to make the game competitive. The problem is our team at the moment just is too young, and we've got so many players that are good young players who I think have careers, but you can't expect them to be getting 25 possessions and lots of intercept marks and contributing to the team in a way that if they played 100 games. I mean, Angus Clark, I think, is a potential 200-game player, but you can't expect him to be playing at the level that you would hope he'd be playing at in 5 years' time, right now in his 10th game. Same with Zach Johnson, who was tearing it up in the VFL, and you'd hope he'd be a player that can play, have a 10-year career. But you just can't expect them to be getting 20, 25 possessions and contributing to the team in the way that you would hope they would in the future right now at this moment. They're just too young and just not impacting games. And that's really the problem with our team at the moment. There's just too many players that are just not having an impact on the game. I hope Shield retains the spot in the side this week and continues to play for the rest of the year. I think that's kind of important. Same with Todd Goldstein. Yeah, I know they're not part of the future of the team, but I don't think it's handy to, play teams that are so young that you've got no experienced players that can provide any guidance. I know even Zach Merritt last year, he was actually of the opinion that, and I think I'm paraphrasing a little bit, I can't remember the exact interview, but I remember him saying that he wasn't against Dyson Heppel staying on for another year. Now, I think that probably would have been a mistake. But the point he was making, and it's a valid point, even if you disagree with, keeping Heppel on, the point he was making, is that he was a bit of a general down there that could provide some leadership, which we just don't have at the moment, like in that part of the ground. So I hope Todd Goldstein and Dylan Shield play out for the remainder of the year, just to give some guidance and experience to the younger players before they're inevitably cut off the list. Because I just don't think it's worth it going into a match with a bunch of 20-year-olds with no leadership on the field. So what do I think the result of this match is going to be? Well, I'm going to pick Sydney by 46 points in this game. At the moment, we're just too young and uncompetitive. A lot of the players have checked out. And it's not even so much that, it's just more that they're playing with no confidence. And confidence is probably the one thing that can, escalate a match from being a 5-goal loss into a 70-point loss. Because players drop their heads, they lose belief in themselves. And at the moment, they're really not playing with any belief. And you can totally understandable that that's the case. You can just see it in the body language of the team. They just don't believe in themselves at the moment. And that's why we just need the season to end, get a good pre-season into everyone, and have another crack at it next year. Well, what do you guys think about the team? Who do you think should come into the team? You got any bold calls? I'd like to hear them in the comments. Have a great day, everybody. Like and subscribe to this channel. And as always, go Bombers.
Watch the Bombers fly.